Have you ever noticed that your best ideas don't arrive when you're trying to have them? There are three things that most creative professionals have quietly removed from their lives, often without realizing it was ever there to begin with. Each one is cutting off a specific part of your creative intelligence, not dramatically, gradually, one filled gap at a time. By the end of this video, you're going to know what they are, why they matter, and have one small thing you can do about each one today. So let's start with a little exercise. I want you to play along and pick something that's near you. Paperclip, a pen, a rubber band, whatever's closest. And just quickly think of everything you could do with that item. You probably came up with 3 to 5 things, practical things an adult with a job and a deadline would think of. Now, I want you to take that same object and just imagine you were 5 years old again. Same object. What would you do with it? A pen might become a lightsaber, a magical wand, or a rocket ship. A rubber band becomes a slingshot. A paperclip can turn into a ring or a piece of jewelry. And that shift from your adult mind's efficient, sensible answers to that inner child's completely unhinged ones is not a party trick. And that's the difference from creating from survival mode to creating from source. It's just as simple as that, as shifting that mindset. And most creative professionals have lost that ability to switch back into the inner child. Not through wrong intentions or one deliberate decision, it was through three specific things that were removed that happened gradually and unnoticed. So let's get into the first one. You eliminated the empty space. All those times you had a few moments to spare and it went to something that you were listening or watching. All those times you crammed in extra tasks in your schedule or to feel like you were a superhero because you could multitask. Most creative professionals haven't had real empty space in years. Every gap gets filled with more productivity tools. Every commute is consumed with a podcast. Every walk is accompanied with a soundtrack. Every meal is paired with screen time. The ideas aren't missing. It's the space where they arrive that's been eliminated. And the brain has a system built specifically for creative thinking. It's called the default mode network. A 2024 study published in a peer-reviewed journal called The Brain studied neural recordings in human patients and found that the default mode network plays a casual role in creativity. When researchers disrupted its activity, creativity dropped. Not focus or memory, but specifically creativity. And here's what activates that default mode network. Absolutely nothing. Not meditation, not journaling, and not a structured creative practice. Nothing. And nothing looks like staring out the window, a walk without earbuds, sitting with food instead of a phone, the commute without a podcast. The default mode network is the most active when nothing external is demanding your attention. And it's the brain's background processing system. It activates when you're not focused on anything specific. So, like when you're daydreaming, staring out the window, or wandering, scientists used to think that this was just the brain being idle. But in those moments, your mind isn't resting, it's processing, it's filing, it's making connections, it's generating the ideas that feel like they arrived from somewhere because they did arrive, just not through effort, through space. In 2026, a review in Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience found that flow states, the creative state most professionals are chasing, require the default mode network and the executive control network to work together. And so the executive control network is the brain's focused, task-oriented system. It's what activates when you're solving a problem, making a decision, or concentrating on something specific. It's the adult self running the session, evaluating, directing, and managing. And so creative flow happens when these two states, the background creative processor, that default mode network, and the focused directing system, that ECN, start working together instead of one trying to override the other. The default mode network generates the raw creative material. And it turns out some of the most important work, making connections, generating ideas, and processing experiences. The executive control network shapes and executes it. When both are online simultaneously, That's what flow actually is at a neurological level. So instead of getting upset with yourself or feeling like that those times when you're looking out into the window and you're staring off into space are bad, or the wrong behavior, or you think you should be doing something else, that is the most pivotal time. And if you allow that default mode network to do what it needs to do, then that adult self, that executive control network, will be able to come in and shape it back and forth. And it's most active when nothing outside is demanding your attention. You can't force your way into flow, but you can create the conditions for those two systems to connect. And that connection requires empty space. And so here's one exercise you can do to start creating more space. Before this video ends, decide on one activity to leave empty space today. One walk without earbuds, one meal without a screen, one commute without sound. Just one. The brain doesn't need hours to feel this effect. It just needs permission and space to do what it does best. Number two, you stopped letting the inner child lead. Most people think that creative play looks like how a child would play. Games, art supplies, fun toys, things or objects to interact with. But it's much more innate and it's much simpler than that. UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, drawing on developmental research, describes play as a primitive instinct, as fundamental as fear or desire. Not a nice to have. This is a biological drive that we have in us to be playful. And research consistently shows that adults with a higher disposition for playfulness are more creative, adapt better to stress, experience more positive emotions, and report greater satisfaction. A 2011 peer-reviewed study found that playfulness in adults was directly linked to creativity and the capacity to support creative processes. Again, in 2013, a study confirmed the same link to well-being. We do not outgrow the need for play. We just eliminate the conditions to allow it to happen. And so here's what the inner child actually looks like as an adult. It's not finger painting, although that could be really fun. It's the shower where the problem you weren't thinking about suddenly has a solution. Nobody told your brain to work on it. Nobody scheduled that insight. This space just allowed it to happen. It's that drive you take that has no destination where something clarifies, not because you were trying to figure it out, because you stopped trying to control it. It's the moment you follow a nudge before you can explain why. You're in the middle of a project and something pulls you toward a completely different direction. There's no logic behind it. There's no brief asking for it, just a quiet pull. And the adult self immediately asks, can I defend this? And the inner child, if it's leading, will have already moved. It's the hunch before you trust the evidence has arrived, that instinct that something is off in a design or a project before you can articulate what it is. And it's that knowing that a concept is right before anyone has confirmed it. That signal arrives from somewhere underneath the analytical mind. The inner child is the one sending it. It's the lighthearted mood you know how to return to, that specific quality of ease when the work stops feeling like work, when you're making something and time disappears and the session ends and you have more energy than when you started with. That's not a lucky accident. That's the inner child running the session instead of the adult self. We can find a place to come back to that's reliable and dependable to tap into this place. Most creative professionals have felt all five of these: the shower insight, the clarity in the aimless driving, the nudge, the hunch, the lighthearted state. And most of them don't have a reliable way back to any of this because they've never been able to name what's actually going on in those moments. And so here's what it's costing you creatively. The inner child doesn't operate in the same way or the same state that the adult self runs a creative session. The adult likes to monitor, likes to evaluate, likes to check for defensibility before the first mark is ever made. But by the time the adult self has assessed whether an idea is worth pushing, the signal that generated it has usually been diluted or overridden entirely. The inner child moves before the assessment starts. That's not naivete, that's a mechanism. And I learned to use this deliberately. When I feel blocked now, I stop trying to create. I ask myself what my inner child wants to do, and I go do that thing. And it's usually 20, 30 minutes without justifying it, without trying to connect it to the work. And it's not productive because it's not supposed to be. And then something will shift. Something will come in, some little inkling idea will just start to pique my interest and it'll get me back into the work because I've given space to allow for that active rest to happen in the brain. And it cleared enough space for that creative intelligence to find an opening. So exercise number 2, I want you to actually take an object and do it for real. Pick another object that's around you, that's closest to you, and actually write down as an adult what you would do with it. And if you want to pause the video, go for it. And then shift gears and really put yourself in that 5-year-old perspective and then write down what you would do with that same item. But I want you to feel in between these two states and that shift in between this very tunnel vision focused perspective that we have as our adult self. And when we open up our minds into that 5-year-old, we start to really see the difference of how many possibilities are open to us. And that shift is the door to your creative cave. You just opened it in 60 seconds, maybe even less than that. And if you can practice finding it until it becomes a state you return to before you create. Number 3, you don't know what your specific nature actually needs. Now, here's where we're going to get precise. The empty space helps. The inner child exercise helps. But what specific kind of space your creative intelligence needs, how your particular inner child actually arrives, what your nervous system requires before the channel opens, that's not generic. That is architecture, and it's specifically your architecture. After 27 years plus of being in the creative industry, doing designing work, branding work, being at Disney, being at Amazon, and I spent a lot of years doing energy healing work that I took seriously, rigorously as a practice, not as a wellness, but as a discipline. And it started to give me the ability to sense what's happening before I had words for it, even though I had felt this for a long time. And to be able to really go deep and follow the direction that hadn't been validated by anybody, to receive something from a place that wasn't logical, and also at the same time, not controlling the outcome and not putting expectations on what I was seeing. I started to deepen that intelligence into the creative work, into business decisions, into understanding what my specific nature actually required from source rather than from survival. And I learned that my inner child arrives through movement and nature, through the quietness, through the solitude, that my creative cave opens after physical stillness in an open environment, that my nervous system needs that attention gap before the work, not after I've already burned out from the session. And that's not universal, that someone else's inner child arrives through music, which I also do too. Someone else's inner child arrives through visual making, or they need to have conversations and talk to people about it, or there might be some other type of silence or some other way that they connect. And so the key is really understanding which one is yours precisely, specifically in real time. What are those conditions that you get in that help you produce a place in this state where you can connect to source? And that difference between a practice and knowing your nature is the difference between a practice that changes your baseline in your life and advice that sounds right but doesn't work. For this exercise, I want to offer up a few questions for you to answer honestly, not in your head, but on paper so that you can really see your answers. And these are the questions that'll begin mapping out your creative nature. When was the last time you followed a nudge, a hunch, or a pull towards something before you could explain why? And what happened when you did? Think about the last time an idea arrived in the shower, on a drive, somewhere you weren't trying to create. What were the actual conditions? What had you stopped doing long enough for it to arrive? Where in your day have you eliminated every gap, every moment of genuine openness? And what creative intelligence might be waiting in the space you keep filling? Is your inner child currently leading any part of your creative process? Or has the adult self taken over every session before it begins? If you really answer those questions honestly and you start to dissect, you're going to start to see the beginning of your map. And so those are the 3 things that get eliminated, that get removed. And those are the 3 things that need to get restored. The empty space where the default mode network does its work, the inner child's quality of attention that opens the channel, and the precise self-knowledge of what your specific nature actually requires to make both of those accessible reliably, not just accidentally. The rubber band exercise works for everyone. The walk without earbud works for most people. But what your inner child specifically needs, how your creative cave actually opens up, what conditions your nervous system requires, that's not in a generic video. That's in a map from your specific architecture. I had to build this map on my own to help myself with my own creative work so that I could figure out the balance because I believe that I can eliminate burnout. And if I do choose burnout or if I choose to go towards it, I know my edge. I know how far I want to take it and I know what my recovery looks like. And so I'm always in this balance because there is no work-life balance. Your work is your life, and we want to balance everything within that so that we can enjoy everything. So if any of this is of interest to you and you want to figure out what your own creative map is, your psychological profile, your nervous system patterns, your natural creative cycles, synthesized in a precise report built for you and a 6-week process to help you integrate that, check out the link below. I think this would be something that you'll really enjoy. It helps me greatly. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.